He called her a pregnant cow, too stupid to notice. He texted those exact words to his mistress while his wife was in the next room, folding baby clothes under a ceiling she had hand-painted with gold stars for their unborn son. He thought he was untouchable, a billionaire CEO with a private jet, 100 lawyers, and a mistress waiting for him in a suite in Geneva. His pregnant wife was just decoration, a bird in a gilded cage. But here's what he did not know. His wife had $80,000 hidden in a savings account he had never found. She had a best friend who worked as a paralegal, and she had just discovered that his affair was only the beginning. Underneath, the cheating was a crime worth $47 million. One phone call from his pregnant wife did not just expose his affair. It destroyed his entire empire. This is the story of how the woman he underestimated burned his world to the ground. It is not about revenge. It is not about money. It is about the moment a woman stops believing the lie that she is not enough. Amelia did not win because she was rich or powerful. She won because she refused to accept that silence was her only option. She had $80,000 her mama told her to save, a best friend who showed up every single time, and the kind of quiet courage that does not need applause to keep going. If there is one thing to carry with you from this story, let it be this. Never underestimate a woman who has been told she is too stupid to fight back. She is not stupid. She is paying attention, and she is making a plan. Now, if this story hit you the way it hit us, do us a small favor. Tap that like button. It takes 1 second, and it tells us you want more stories like this one. Drop a comment and tell us, what would you have done in Amelia's shoes? Would you have taken the $3 million deal, or would you have fought? We genuinely want to know. Everyone at that baby shower looked at Amelia Brooks Sterling and saw a woman who had everything. A billionaire husband, a penthouse on Park Avenue, a baby on the way. And 4 days ago, she would have believed them. But here's the thing about perfect lives. They do not crack quietly. They shatter. And the sound is loud enough to bring down an empire. The scent of 1,000 white roses flown in that morning from Ecuador filled the penthouse like a sweet, suffocating fog. 40 guests moved through the sprawling living room, champagne flutes catching the afternoon light, their laughter, a soundtrack of privilege and ease. The caterer, hired from a Michelin-starred restaurant in Tribeca, circulated trays of bite-sized delicacies that cost more per plate than most people spent on a week of groceries. Amelia stood near the window, one hand resting on her swollen belly, the other holding a glass of sparkling water she had barely touched. 7 months pregnant with a boy they had already named Spencer. She smiled at every guest who approached. She accepted every compliment about how she was glowing. She played the part with the effortless grace of a woman who had spent 5 years perfecting it. Under the table where the gift bags sat, in neat rows, her hands were trembling. Alexander Sterling arrived 20 minutes late, which was early by his standards. He swept into the room the way he swept into every room, as if the air itself rearranged to make space for him. 38 years old, 6'2", jaw cut from marble, and eyes the color of a stormy sea. He wore a navy suit that cost more than Amelia had earned in a year of teaching high school art in Columbus, Ohio. That felt like another lifetime now. He crossed the room to her, slid his arm around her waist, and pressed his lips to her temple. The gesture was practiced and smooth, like a handshake between diplomats. "Sorry I'm late, my love." Board meeting ran over. He turned to the room and raised his glass. "I want to thank everyone for being here to celebrate the most important thing in my life. My incredible wife and our son. Amelia, you are the most beautiful woman in any room, and Spencer is the luckiest kid in the world to have you as his mother." Everyone raised their glasses. Women whispered about how lucky she was. Men clapped Alexander on the back and told him he had it all figured out. Amelia smiled. She said thank you. She squeezed his hand. And she thought about the text message she had found 4 days ago on his iPad. The one from a contact, saved simply as K, the one that read, "Do not worry about the pregnant cow. She is too stupid to notice anything, the pregnant cow." Those 3 words had detonated inside her like a bomb on a quiet Tuesday evening, and the shrapnel was still tearing through her 4 days later. She had not slept more than 2 hours a night since. She had not cried. She had not screamed or thrown anything or confronted him. Something far more dangerous than rage had taken root inside her. Something cold and patient and calculating. Something that scared her a little when she caught it staring back at her from the bathroom mirror at 3 in the morning. But she was getting ahead of herself. To understand how Amelia Brooks Sterling, a former high school art teacher from Columbus, Ohio, brought down one of the most powerful men on Wall Street, you have to go back to that Tuesday. You have to go back to the nursery with the hand-painted constellations on the ceiling. You have to understand what it feels like to have your entire world rewritten in the span of 2 text messages. It was a Tuesday evening in late August, the kind of humid, heavy New York evening where the city feels like it is breathing on you. Amelia was in the nursery, folding baby clothes she had spent the afternoon organizing by size and color. The walls were navy blue, and across the ceiling, she had painted the constellations herself. Orion and Cassiopeia, and the Big Dipper in metallic gold paint that caught the light like real stars. It was the one room in the penthouse that felt entirely hers. Everything else, the Italian marble, the custom furniture, the art collection, worth more than some country's GDP, that was Alexander's world. But the nursery was hers and Spencer's. She was folding a tiny onesie with little rockets on it when Alexander's iPad lit up on the dresser. It was synced to his personal phone. Something he had set up months ago and apparently forgotten about. The notification sat on the lock screen like a grenade with the pin pulled. A message from Kay last night was everything. Geneva cannot come soon enough. Amelia's hands stopped moving. She stared at the screen. The little rocket onesie still in her fingers. Her first instinct was denial, immediate, almost physical. It is a work thing, a client, an investor. It is nothing. She almost put the iPad down. Her fingers were actually moving to set it on the dresser and walk away to go back to folding tiny clothes for her tiny son and pretending the world was still the shape she believed it to be. Then the second message appeared. "Do not worry about the pregnant cow. She is too stupid to notice anything." Amelia read it twice, 3 times. The words did not change. They sat on the screen, glowing in the dim nursery light, casual and cruel and absolute. The pregnant cow. She is too stupid to notice. It was not just the affair. Affair she had been raised to understand, if not accept. Her own mother, God rest her soul, had once told her, during a rare moment of raw honesty, men with money, baby girl, they stray. It is what they do. What matters is what you do about it. But this was not straying. This was contempt. This was a man and his mistress laughing at her, reducing her to a joke. An animal. A stupid, pregnant, oblivious animal pinned up in a luxury apartment while her husband flew around the world with another woman. Something shifted inside Amelia in that moment. It was not dramatic. There was no crack of thunder or rush of adrenaline. It was quieter than that. It was the sound of a door closing. The door to the version of herself that trusted, the version that believed, The version that had spent 5 years smiling at fundraisers and hosting dinner parties and slowly, imperceptibly, disappearing. She picked up the iPad. She entered the passcode, the one Alexander used for everything because he was too arrogant to think anyone would look. 0915, his birthday. And she started reading. What she found in the next 45 minutes changed everything. 6 months of messages between Alexander and Kay, whose full name turned out to be Katerina Voss. 6 months of hotel confirmations in Paris, Dubai, London, Geneva, always booked under shell company names. A jewelry receipt from Graf for a $45,000 canary diamond necklace. Amelia had never received a canary diamond necklace. There were emails and a secondary account Alexander had forgotten to log out of on a laptop in his study. Love letters, essentially. Promises of a future together. References to our place in Italy. Plans for when this is all sorted, as if Amelia and Spencer and 5 years of marriage were a clerical error to be resolved. She sat on the floor of the nursery, surrounded by baby clothes and gold-painted stars, and she read every single message. She screenshotted everything and uploaded the images to a cloud account Alexander did not know existed. She was methodical about it, thorough. She did not miss a single thread, and she did not cry, not once. When she was finished, she placed the iPad exactly where she had found it. She picked up the rocket onesie from the floor. She folded it neatly and placed it in the dresser drawer. Then she turned off the nursery light and walked to the kitchen and poured herself a glass of milk because the baby books said calcium was important in the 3rd trimester. She stood at the kitchen island in the dark penthouse, drinking milk, and she made a plan. Not a plan for crying or confronting or begging for an explanation. A plan for war. But first, she needed to wait. Alexander was leaving for Geneva on Friday. A business trip, he said. A crucial meeting with the Swiss banking consortium. She now knew exactly what that trip really was. And she knew that the best thing she could do, the smartest thing, was to let him go. Let him fly across the Atlantic to his mistress. Let him feel safe and confident and untouchable. Because the moment he was in the air, she was going to start dismantling his world. Thursday night, 2 days after the discovery, they sat across from each other at the dining table. Alexander had brought home takeout from her favorite Italian place, a gesture she now recognized as guilt, masquerading as thoughtfulness. Geneva is going to be quick, he said, twirling linguine around his fork. The Swiss bankers are ready to close on the European credit line. This deal could redefine Sterling Global's presence on the continent for the next decade. He reached across the table and took her hand. Those eyes. The same stormy blue-gray eyes she had fallen in love with at a gallery opening in Brooklyn 5 years ago, when she was 27 and he was 33, and the world seemed like it was made of nothing but possibility. She had been standing in front of a painting by an artist, nobody famous, and he had walked up to her and said, "You are looking at that painting the way I wish someone would look at me." It was the cheesiest line she had ever heard, and she had laughed so hard she had spilled her wine, and somehow that had been the beginning of everything. Those same eyes were looking at her now with a warmth and sincerity that she might have believed 4 days ago. "I will only be gone 48 hours, he said. "I will be back before you and Spencer even have a chance to miss me." Amelia squeezed his hand and smiled her most convincing smile. "Of course, darling. Business is business. Spencer and I will be right here waiting." That night she lay in bed beside him, listening to his breathing slow into sleep. Her hand was on her belly where Spencer was doing his nightly gymnastics routine. She thought about the man lying next to her. She thought about the man she had married. She was no longer sure they were the same person. The Alexander she had married had been different. Not perfect, never perfect, but genuine. He had come from nothing, a working-class kid from Scranton, Pennsylvania, raised by a single mother who worked double shifts as a nurse. He had built Sterling Global from the ground up through sheer force of will and intelligence and a kind of relentless ambition that was, in those early years, inspiring rather than frightening. The first 3 years of their marriage had been good, really good. He had been attentive and romantic and present. He had rubbed her feet without being asked. He had left stupid little notes on the bathroom mirror. He had once driven 4 hours in a snowstorm to bring her the specific brand of ginger tea she liked when she had the flu. She did not know exactly when that man had disappeared. Power did not corrupt all at once. It was more like erosion, a little more arrogance after each successful deal, a little more distance after each billion-dollar milestone, a little more certainty that the rules that applied to ordinary people no longer applied to him. By the time she noticed, the man she had married was a ghost inside the stranger she now shared a bed with. She closed her eyes and did not sleep. Friday morning, Alexander kissed her forehead at 6:30, told her he loved her, and walked out the door with a carry-on bag and a smile that no longer reached his eyes. Amelia waited exactly 15 minutes. Then she picked up her phone and called the one person in the world she trusted completely. Diane Castillo, known to everyone who loved her as Dee, arrived at the penthouse in 40 minutes flat. She was still wearing her work clothes from the small law firm in Queens where she worked as a paralegal. Her hair was in a messy bun. She was carrying a gas station coffee in one hand and a bag of sour gummy worms in the other, because that was what Dee grabbed when she was in a hurry, which was always. She took one look at Amelia's face and said, "Who do I need to kill?" Dee Castillo was 35 years old, a single mom to a 6-year-old daughter named Lily, and she had been Amelia's best friend since their sophomore year at Ohio State. They had been assigned as roommates in a cramped dorm room that smelled like old carpet and ambition, and they had been inseparable ever since. Dee was everything Amelia was not. Loud where Amelia was quiet, blunt where Amelia was diplomatic. The kind of woman who said exactly what she thought, and then said it again, louder for the people in the back. She was also the most loyal human being Amelia had ever known. When Amelia married Alexander and moved into the world of private jets and charity galas, Dee had never once made her feel guilty about it. She had shown up to the wedding in a dress she bought on sale at Nordstrom Rack and danced until 2 in the morning and told Alexander to his face, "You better treat my girl right or I will make your life a living nightmare." Alexander had laughed. He had thought she was joking. Dee had not been joking. Amelia led her to the kitchen island and opened her laptop. She showed her everything. The text messages, the emails, the hotel confirmations, the jewelry receipt for the $45,000 necklace, and those 3 words, the pregnant cow. She is too stupid to notice. Dee's reaction was immediate and volcanic. She paced the length of the kitchen, her heels clicking on the marble floor, unleashing a torrent of profanity so creative and so sustained that Amelia, despite everything, almost laughed. Dee called Alexander names that had never been combined in the English language before. She punched a throw pillow. She kicked the base of the kitchen island and hurt her toe and kept cursing without missing a beat. Then she cried. Dee, who never cried, who had gone through her own divorce without shedding a public tear, stood in the middle of Alexander Sterling's $1 million kitchen and cried for her best friend. And then she stopped. She wiped her face with the back of her hand. She took a breath, and the paralegal kicked in. "Okay," she said. "We are not doing this the way he expects. We are not crying and throwing his clothes out the window. That is what he is prepared for. That is the playbook for the hysterical pregnant wife, and he has a counter for every move in that playbook. We are going to be smart, smarter than him, which honestly should not be that hard because the man is clearly thinking with the wrong body part. She sat down across from Amelia and pulled the laptop toward her. First things first, money. You cannot fight a war without money. What do you have? Amelia hesitated. This was the part she had never told anyone, not even Dee. He controls everything. The bank accounts, the credit cards, the investments. My personal credit card has a $5,000 limit. $5,000 against a billionaire. That is like bringing a squirt gun to a forest fire. But, Amelia said, and she paused, making a decision that would alter the course of everything. I have $80,000 in a savings account he does not know about. Dee stared at her. $80,000? Hidden? How? My mom. Before she died, she sat me down and told me something. She said, a woman should always have her own money, baby girl. Always. No matter how much she loves her husband, no matter how rich he is, you keep something for yourself. You put it somewhere he cannot touch, and you never, ever tell him about it. Amelia's voice cracked slightly on the word mom. I saved it from my teaching salary before I quit to be Mrs. Sterling, $1,500 a month for 4 years. I never touched it. Dee was quiet for a moment. Then she said, your mama was a genius. Rest her soul. She paused. 80,000 is not a lot against a billionaire, but it is enough to start a war. They spent the rest of the morning building a battle plan on Dee's yellow legal pad. The plan had 3 pillars. First, Amelia needed a divorce attorney. Someone good, someone discreet, someone who would not be intimidated by the Sterling name. Second, they needed to gather evidence, not just of the affair, but of everything. Bank statements, tax returns, property records, anything that could give Amelia leverage in what was going to be the most asymmetric legal fight in the history of New York divorce court. Third, and this was Dee's instinct talking, they needed to follow the money. Something about this does not feel right, Dee said, chewing on a gummy worm. The shell company names on the hotel bookings, the hidden email account. This is not just a guy hiding a girlfriend. This is a guy hiding a system. And where there is a system, there is money. Amelia looked at her. You think he is doing something illegal? I think a man who builds an elaborate infrastructure of deception to hide his mistress is probably using that same infrastructure for other things, things that might be a lot more serious than an affair. She was right, but neither of them knew yet just how right she was. Monday morning, Amelia met a divorce attorney named Sandra Palmer at a diner in Midtown. She chose a diner because she was afraid to be seen entering a law office. She chose Midtown because it was anonymous enough to disappear in. She wore sunglasses and a baseball cap, which made her feel like a character in a movie. Except in movies, the pregnant woman was never the one doing the investigating. Sandra Palmer was in her late 50s, with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor that reminded Amelia of her 11th grade math teacher. Dee's boss had recommended her. She is not flashy, he had said, but she is very, very good. Sandra listened to Amelia's story without interrupting. She looked at the screenshots on Amelia's phone. She asked questions that were precise and practical, nothing about feelings or fairness, just facts and strategy. You are entitled to equitable distribution under New York law, Sandra said. With his net worth, you are looking at a significant settlement. But I need to be honest with you. A man like Alexander Sterling will hire an army of lawyers. The best in the country. This will not be a negotiation. It will be a war of attrition. And wars cost money. She paused. How much do you have independent access to? 80,000. Sandra's face did not change, but the pause before she spoke told Amelia everything. That is a start. But it will not last long against a billionaire's legal team. My advice is this: do not tip your hand yet. He does not know you know, correct? He knows I am suspicious. He does not know how much I know. Then we work fast. While he is still underestimating you, which frankly seems to be his specialty, we gather everything we can. Bank statements, tax returns, property records, corporate filings, anything with his name or his signature. The moment he knows you are building a case, he will lock down everything, every account, every document, every avenue of information. We need to be ahead of that. He is in Geneva right now, Amelia said. He will be back Wednesday night. Then you have 2 days. Use them. Meanwhile, Dee was doing her own digging. During her lunch break at the law firm, she accessed the legal database her firm used for research and ran a search on Sterling Global. What she found made her forget about her turkey sandwich entirely. Sterling Global had been named in several civil filings over the past 2 years related to suspicious offshore transactions. The filings had all been settled quietly, out of court, which in the legal world was often code for someone paid a lot of money to make a problem disappear. There is something rotten in that company, Dee told Amelia over the phone that afternoon. This is not just about a mistress. There is money moving in ways that do not add up. We need someone who can read financial documents the way I read legal filings. Someone who knows where to look for the bodies. Do you know someone like that? Maybe. Let me make a call. But before Dee could make that call, Amelia made a mistake. It was a mistake born of exhaustion and loneliness, and the desperate human need to be heard by someone who was not a lawyer or a paralegal. It was a mistake that nearly cost her everything. She called Pastor James Walker. Pastor Walker had been the Sterling's family pastor for 4 years. His church, Grace Fellowship, was a large non-denominational congregation on the Upper East Side that catered to the kind of wealthy New Yorkers who wanted their faith comfortable and their sermons short. Alexander had been a member since before the marriage, drawn less by spiritual hunger and more by the networking opportunities. The congregation read like a Fortune 500 directory, but Alexander was more than just a member. He was the church's most generous donor. 6 months earlier, he had pledged $2 million to fund a new community center, a project that had become Pastor Walker's consuming passion. The groundbreaking ceremony was scheduled for October. Architectural plans were drawn. Contractors were hired. The $2 million was the cornerstone of everything. Amelia did not know any of this. She knew Pastor Walker as a warm, grandfatherly man with kind eyes and a reassuring voice. She knew him as the man who had officiated their wedding, who had prayed over her when she first learned she was pregnant, who had held her hand in his office and told her that God's plan was always good, even when life was hard. She trusted him the way you trust the people who stand at the front of a church and tell you they speak for something bigger than themselves. On Wednesday evening, while Alexander was still in Geneva, Amelia called the pastor and asked to meet. She drove to the church in the fading light of a late August day, her belly pressing against the steering wheel, and she sat in his office, a warm, wood-paneled room that smelled like old books and coffee, and she told him the truth. Not all of it. She did not mention Dee or Sandra Palmer or the screenshots saved to a cloud account. She did not mention the offshore transactions or the forensic accounting plan. She told him only about the affair. The text messages, the mistress, and those 3 words that had cracked her world open. He called me a pregnant cow, she said, and her voice broke. He told his mistress, I was too stupid to notice. She cried. For the first time since finding those messages, she cried in front of another person. Not the controlled tears of a woman with a plan, but the raw, gasping sobs of a woman whose heart had been shattered by the person who was supposed to protect it. Pastor Walker listened. He held her hands. He prayed. His voice was gentle and his words were practiced. The words of a man who had counseled hundreds of couples through crisis. Marriages can survive infidelity, Amelia. With faith and counseling, there is always a path to healing. God never gives us more than we can bear. She drove home feeling lighter, not healed, not even close, but lighter. Like she had set down a weight she had been carrying alone for days. Maybe she was not completely alone in this. Maybe there were still good people in the world who could be trusted. She was wrong. Wednesday night, 10:47. Alexander came home from what he claimed was a late dinner with clients. Though Amelia now knew he had landed back from Geneva that afternoon. He walked into the bedroom where she was propped up against pillows, reading a book about infant sleep training that she could not concentrate on. He sat on the edge of the bed and took off his watch, the $60,000 Patek Philippe she had given him for their 3rd anniversary, back when giving him expensive things still felt like love instead of tribute. "Hey, sweetheart," he said, his voice carrying that particular warmth he deployed when he wanted something. "Pastor Walker called me today." The book almost slipped from Amelia's hands. She caught it. She kept her face neutral. "He is worried about you," Alexander continued, his tone dripping with manufactured concern. "He says you have been stressed and emotional, having some anxiety about the pregnancy. Apparently, you were pretty upset when you talked to him." Every word was a precision strike. Stressed, emotional, anxiety, upset. He was not just reporting what the pastor had said. He was building a narrative, a diagnosis, a framework that would follow her into any courtroom, any custody hearing, any conversation where her credibility might matter. "Honestly, babe, I have noticed it too. You have seemed distant lately, almost paranoid. Maybe we should talk to your doctor about adjusting your prenatal supplements or something. I just want you healthy, for you and for Spencer." He kissed her forehead, the same forehead he had kissed at the baby shower in front of 40 people, the same gesture, the same practiced tenderness, and Amelia felt her skin crawl. He walked into the bathroom. She heard the shower turn on. She sat perfectly still, the sleep training book open in her lap, and she felt the full weight of what had just happened settle on her like a physical thing. The pastor had called Alexander, not the details of the affair, not the specific accusations, but enough. He had told Alexander that his wife was anxious, emotional, stressed, and Alexander, with the speed and precision of a man who manipulated people for a living, had immediately weaponized it. He was not just covering his tracks. He was laying groundwork. If this ever went to court, if there was ever a custody battle, he would have a pastor, a man of God, ready to testify that Amelia Sterling had been showing signs of mental instability months before the divorce. Pregnancy hormones, he would say. She was not herself. She was paranoid, seeing things that were not there. It was gaslighting elevated to an art form, and it had been handed to him on a silver platter by a man Amelia had trusted with her deepest pain. She picked up her phone with hands that shook so badly she had to type her text message 3 times. "To D," the pastor told him. He called Alexander. "I am an idiot." D's reply came in 11 seconds. "You are not an idiot. He is a snake in a collar. Now we know who we cannot trust." "That is valuable information. Come to my place tomorrow. We regroup." Amelia stared at the message. D was right. This was information. Painful, humiliating information, but information nonetheless. Add it to the list. The pastor was compromised. One more person she could not trust. One more door that had closed. But the damage went beyond the loss of a confidant. Alexander now knew she was suspicious. He did not know how much she knew. He did not know about the $80,000, or Sandra Palmer, or the cloud account full of screenshots, but the element of surprise had taken a bullet. The clock that was already ticking had just gotten faster. She turned off the light and lay in the dark, listening to the shower run, and she tried to calculate how many moves she had left. Thursday morning. While Alexander was at the office, Amelia went to Dee's apartment in Queens. It was a two-bedroom on the third floor of a walk-up that smelled like the Indian restaurant downstairs and the lavender air freshener Dee used to combat it. The furniture was second-hand. The refrigerator had Lily's drawings held up with alphabet magnets. It was the opposite of the penthouse in every possible way. And for the first time in days, Amelia felt like she could breathe. She sat on Dee's couch with a yellow legal pad and a peanut butter toast that Dee had made before leaving for work, and she made a list. What he knows: I am suspicious. I am emotional. The pastor has confirmed this for him. What he does not know: the $80,000, Sandra Palmer. Dee's discovery about the offshore filings. Every screenshot I took saved to a cloud account he cannot access. The fact that I have spent the last week becoming a different person than the one he thinks I am. She called Sandra Palmer. He knows I am suspicious, but he thinks it is just hormonal jealousy. He does not know about anything else. He flew back from Geneva last night. What do I do? Sandra's voice was calm and direct. Let the dust settle for a moment. Do not give him any reason to escalate his surveillance of you. This weekend, go through the motions. Be the wife he expects. But here is what I need you to do. Get into his home office and photograph everything you can. Bank statements, account numbers, investment documents, anything with a signature or a dollar amount. And Amelia, this is important. Do not use your phone to photograph anything. If he is monitoring your cloud accounts or your phone backup, he will see the images. Buy a cheap digital camera with cash. Nothing that syncs to anything. A cheap digital camera, Amelia repeated. From where? CVS, Walgreens. Anywhere. Pay cash. Leave no trail. That afternoon, Amelia walked to a CVS 3 blocks from Dee's apartment and bought a $29 digital camera with a $20 bill and a 10. She stood in the checkout line, behind a teenager, buying energy drinks, and an elderly man buying cough syrup, holding this ridiculous little camera, and she thought about how 6 months ago she had been choosing between 2 couture gowns for a charity gala at the Metropolitan Museum. Now she was buying spy equipment at a drugstore. She almost laughed. Almost. Spencer kicked, and she took it as encouragement. That night, back at the penthouse, she sat across from Alexander at dinner and performed the role of the slightly tired, slightly emotional, thoroughly unsuspecting pregnant wife. She asked about his day. She told him about a funny thing she had read in her pregnancy book. She let him rub her feet while they watched television. She felt like an actress in a play she had not auditioned for. He was performing too, she realized. The attentive husband, the devoted father-to-be. They were 2 people playing roles for an audience of 1, each watching the other for cracks in the performance. It was exhausting. It was also, in a grim way, clarifying. This was what their marriage had become. Not a partnership, a performance. And the only question left was which of them would drop the mask first. Friday morning, Alexander left for the office at 7. He kissed her forehead. He told her he loved her. He walked out the door. And Amelia Brooks Sterling went to war. The moment Alexander's car turned the corner of Park Avenue, Amelia was in his home office. She had been in this room thousands of times. It was where Alexander worked in the evenings, a mahogany-paneled study with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves filled with books he had never read, a massive desk that had once belonged to a railroad baron, and a view of Central Park that made you feel like you owned the city. She had brought him coffee in this room. She had kissed him goodnight in this room. She had never once thought to look through his files. Now she moved through the space with the methodical calm of a woman who had spent the past week learning to think like someone she used to trust. Sandra Palmer's instructions were clear. Photograph everything: bank statements, quarterly reports, anything with a name, an account number, a signature. Be thorough, be fast, be invisible. She opened the filing cabinet with a key she had found months ago in a kitchen drawer and never thought twice about. Inside were hanging folders organized with the precision of a man who trusted his own invincibility. Monthly statements from 3 different banks. Quarterly reports from Sterling Global marked confidential. Tax documents going back 5 years. She photographed everything with the cheap CVS camera, the shutter sound absurdly loud in the quiet apartment. In the bottom drawer, beneath a stack of old magazines that served as camouflage, she found something else. A laptop. Not his main computer, which sat open on the desk, but a second one, smaller, hidden in a false bottom of the drawer. It was a sleek, custom-looking device she had never seen before. She called Dee. He has a second laptop, hidden. I cannot get past the password screen. Do not try, Dee said immediately. If he has security software, which a man like that absolutely does, it will log any failed login attempts. He will know someone tried to get in. Just photograph it. The serial number, the brand, everything visible. Document that it exists. That is ammunition all by itself. An innocent man does not hide laptops in false-bottomed drawers. Amelia photographed the laptop from every angle, then replaced it exactly as she had found it, down to the angle of the magazines stacked on top. Saturday brought the next piece of the puzzle. Dee had made her phone call, and it had led to a man named Frank Hobson. Frank Hobson was 55 years old, semi-retired, and not remotely what Amelia had expected. She had imagined someone sleek and sharp, the forensic accounting equivalent of a surgeon. Frank was more like a rumpled bear who happened to be brilliant. He was overweight, perpetually clutching a cup of coffee, and he worked out of a home office in Hoboken, New Jersey. That looked like a paper recycling center had exploded inside a room. Stacks of old case files covered every surface. A cat named Deficit sat on top of a filing cabinet and watched visitors with supreme indifference. But Frank Hobson had spent 22 years in the IRS Criminal Investigations Division. He had put more white-collar criminals in federal prison than most prosecutors. He had retired 3 years ago, allegedly to do crossword puzzles and watch true crime documentaries. But Dee's law firm had used him as an expert witness 2 years back, and he owed her a favor. I do not do favors, Frank had told Dee on the phone. I do puzzles, and this sounds like a good puzzle. Dee brought him to her apartment on Saturday morning, where Amelia had spread every photographed document across the kitchen table like a war map. Frank sat down, put on his reading glasses, accepted a cup of coffee that Dee made exactly the way he liked it, which was black and strong enough to dissolve a spoon, and began reviewing the documents. He was quiet for a long time. Amelia and Dee sat across from him, barely breathing, watching his eyes move across the pages. His expression gave nothing away. He could have been reading a grocery list. Then he put down his coffee and said, "Yeah, there is smoke here, a lot of smoke." He pointed to a series of transactions on one of the bank statements. These payments, consulting fees to companies I have never heard of, finder's fees for deals that do not appear in the quarterly reports. The amounts are not huge individually, 100,000 here, 200,000 there, but they are regular, monthly, and they are going to entities that, based on the names and registration numbers, look like shell corporations. Shell corporations, Amelia repeated. Companies that exist on paper, but do not actually do anything. No employees, no office, no real business activity. They exist for one purpose, to move money from point A to point B without anyone seeing it. It is a classic structure for embezzlement. Embezzlement, Dee said. You mean he is stealing from his own company? I mean there is smoke, Frank said carefully. I can see the patterns. I can smell the fire, but I cannot prove it from these documents alone. These are breadcrumbs. I need the actual transaction records from inside the company, wire transfer confirmations, board authorizations, the internal ledgers that show where the money actually went. Someone inside Sterling Global has to open that door for me. How long would it take to build a case? Amelia asked. With inside access? 2, maybe 3 weeks. I could map every dollar. And without it? Frank shrugged. Months, maybe never. A good defense lawyer would tear apart everything I have right now. These are external documents, bank statements, and quarterly reports. A defense attorney would say they are incomplete, taken out of context, misinterpreted by a retired accountant with too much time on his hands. I need corroboration from inside the machine. 2 weeks, maybe 3. Amelia did not have that kind of time. She could feel the window closing with every hour that passed. Then, on Sunday, she found the thread that would unravel everything. She was reviewing Alexander's personal email screenshots on her laptop at Dee's kitchen table, going through them for the 3rd time, when she noticed something she had initially overlooked. Buried in a chain of forwarded messages was a property tax notification. It had been forwarded from one of Alexander's secondary email accounts to another, a detail that suggested he was trying to keep it away from his primary accounts. The notification was for a property at an address in Portofino, Italy. The owner was listed as Apex Holdings, LLC, registered in the British Virgin Islands. Amelia had never heard of Apex Holdings. She had never been to Portofino, and Alexander had never mentioned owning property in Italy. She sent the information to Frank. His callback came within the hour, and when she answered, the bored, rumpled retiree was gone. In his place was the sharp-edged IRS investigator who had spent 2 decades hunting financial predators. Apex Holdings purchased a villa in Portofino 9 months ago for 25 million euros, Frank said, speaking faster than she had ever heard him. The purchase was funded by a series of wire transfers that trace back through 3 separate shell companies, each registered in a different tax haven: the Cayman Islands, Panama, and the British Virgin Islands. When you follow the money backward through those shells, it connects to accounts that are consistent with the suspicious transactions I identified in Sterling Global's bank statements. In English, Frank. He bought a 25 million euro villa in Italy with money he stole from his own company, and he tried to hide it behind so many layers of corporate fiction that no one would ever find it. The room went quiet. Dee sat down slowly. Amelia felt Spencer kick, hard, as if he could sense the gravity of what was happening. This is not a man hiding a girlfriend, Frank continued. This is a man building a new life with stolen money. We are talking about embezzlement on a massive scale, potentially tens of millions of dollars siphoned from Sterling Global over a period of years. Can you prove it? Amelia asked. Her voice sounded strange to her own ears, flat, hollow. I can see the smoke, I can smell the fire, but to prove it, to build a case that would stand up in front of the SEC or a federal judge, I need someone inside Sterling Global, a CFO, a comptroller, someone with access to the internal financial systems who can verify that these external transactions match the internal records. Without that, a good defense attorney will say these are coincidences. Personal notes, unverified assumptions. Amelia stared at the property tax notification on her screen. A villa in Portofino, 25 million euros. Built for Katerina Voss, she was certain. A love nest funded with money stolen from the company that was supposed to be Spencer's legacy. I need you to document everything you can from what we have, she told Frank. Build the best preliminary report you can. Map the shell companies, the wire transfers, the timeline. Make it as clear and as damning as possible. And then what? Then I am going to find someone inside that building who has a conscience. She hung up and looked at Dee. We need a name. Someone at Sterling Global. Someone high enough to have access to the internal records. Someone who might be willing to talk. Dee was already thinking. The CFO, Nathan Cross. I have seen his name on some of the filings at the firm. He signed off on a lot of the quarterly reports. Do you think he knows what Alexander is doing? I think a CFO who does not know his CEO is stealing tens of millions, is either complicit or incompetent. Either way, he is someone we need to talk to. But before they could approach Nathan Cross, before they could take the next step in a plan that was becoming larger and more dangerous by the hour, life reminded Amelia that she was not just a woman at war. She was a mother, and her baby needed her. Monday morning, Amelia went to her scheduled prenatal appointment at the obstetrics practice on the Upper East Side. She went alone because Alexander was at the office and because going alone had become normal, one of those small surrenders that had accumulated so gradually she barely noticed them anymore. The waiting room was full of pregnant women in various stages of expectation, leafing through parenting magazines and scrolling their phones. Amelia filled out the standard forms and waited for her name to be called, feeling for all the world like the most ordinary woman in the room. Nobody here knew that she was sitting on evidence of a multi-million-dollar embezzlement. Nobody knew that her husband had a mistress in Europe and a villa he had bought with stolen money. Nobody knew about the cheap CVS camera, or the forensic accountant in Hoboken, or the text messages that had rewritten her entire life. To them, she was just another pregnant woman waiting for an ultrasound. There was a strange comfort in that. The technician was a young woman with gentle hands and a cheerful voice. She spread the cold gel on Amelia's belly and pressed the ultrasound wand to her skin. And there he was, on the screen. Spencer, his tiny heart beating, his miniature fist clenched near his face, his body curled in the universal posture of someone not ready to face the world just yet. There is your boy, the technician said. Looking good. Then she paused. She moved the wand slightly. She stared at the screen with an expression that shifted almost imperceptibly from cheerful to focused. Just going to take another look at something, she said, her voice still bright, but with a new, careful quality that made Amelia's stomach tighten. She repositioned the wand, stared at the screen, then she said the words that no pregnant woman ever wants to hear. I am going to have the doctor come in and take a look. Nothing to worry about. Just want a second opinion on something. Nothing to worry about. That phrase, in a medical setting, was almost always a lie. Dr. Mitchell came in 4 minutes later. She was a calm, experienced woman in her 50s who had delivered hundreds of babies and had mastered the art of the reassuring face. She reviewed the ultrasound images with the focused attention of someone reading a very important document. Amelia, we are seeing an irregularity in the baby's heart rhythm. It could be nothing. These things often resolve on their own in the 3rd trimester, but I want you to see a specialist this week, a pediatric cardiologist, just to be safe. What does irregularity mean? Amelia's voice sounded far away, like someone else was speaking through her mouth. Is he okay? It means we need more information before I can answer that question. I do not want you to panic. Most of these irregularities are benign and resolve without any intervention. But I do need you to take care of yourself. She paused and looked at Amelia with an intensity that went beyond medical. Your blood pressure is elevated. Your stress markers are high. Whatever is happening in your life right now, Amelia, your baby needs you to find some calm. Whatever is happening in your life right now, if only she knew. Amelia thanked the doctor. She got dressed. She walked through the waiting room, past all the other pregnant women with their magazines and their phones and their ordinary worries. And she got in her car and she drove. She did not go home. She did not go to Dee's. She drove to a parking lot behind a Kroger grocery store in a neighborhood she did not know, and she parked and she turned off the engine and she sat there. For 45 minutes, Amelia Brooks Sterling sat in a parking lot behind a grocery store with her hands on her belly, and she came apart. Not about Alexander, not about the affair or the money or the villa in Portofino or the word cow burned into her brain like a brand. About Spencer, about the tiny heart beating inside her that might not be beating right. About the fact that her baby might be sick and she was utterly, completely alone. She could not call her husband because her husband was the enemy. She could not call her mother because her mother was dead. She could not call her pastor because her pastor was a traitor. She could not call a single member of the glittering social circle that had surrounded her for 5 years because every one of them was Alexander's friend first, and she had learned the hard way what happened when she trusted the wrong person. She had never felt so alone in her life, not when her mother died, not when she left Ohio for New York, not even on the night she found the text messages. This was a different kind of alone. This was the alone of a mother who cannot protect her child. She called Dee. Her voice was barely a whisper. Something might be wrong with the baby. Dee did not ask questions. She did not say she was in the middle of something at work. She said, "Where are you?" And when Amelia told her, she said, "Stay there. I am coming." 25 minutes later, Dee's 10-year-old Honda Civic pulled into the parking lot. She got out, walked to Amelia's car, opened the passenger door, and slid in. She did not speak immediately. She took Amelia's hand and held it. "Tell me," she said. Amelia told her about the ultrasound, about the irregularity, about the specialist appointment, about sitting in this parking lot for 45 minutes, unable to move, wondering if she was destroying her baby by fighting this war. "Maybe I should stop," Amelia said. "All of it, the lawyer, Frank, the investigation. Maybe I should just take whatever Alexander offers and go home to Ohio and focus on Spencer. Maybe fighting this is killing my baby." Dee was quiet. She did not rush to contradict or reassure. She sat with the weight of it. Then she said something that Amelia would remember for the rest of her life. "Do you remember sophomore year when I got mono and missed 3 weeks of class and I was sure I was going to fail out? And you showed up at my dorm room every single night with your notes and flashcards and that disgusting green tea you swore would fix everything?" Amelia almost smiled. Almost. "It did fix everything. No, you fixed everything. You fixed because that is what you do. You show up, you fight, and your baby is going to be fine because he has a mother who will burn down the whole world to protect him." Dee squeezed her hand. "Now let us go get some food because you are eating for a future world changer and a parking lot behind a Kroger is no place for royalty." They went to a diner. Amelia ordered a grilled cheese and tomato soup, the exact meal her mother used to make her when she was sick as a child. She ate every bite. Spencer kicked the entire time, steady and strong, as if he was saying, I am right here, Mom. I am not going anywhere. At the table, over coffee that Dee drank and decaf tea that Amelia sipped, they made a pact. They would keep fighting, but they would also take care of themselves. No more 18-hour research marathons. No more skipping meals. Amelia would see the specialist, and she would be honest with her doctor about her stress levels, without revealing the specifics. One step at a time, Dee said. We eat the elephant one bite at a time. That is a terrible metaphor. I am a paralegal, not a poet. Now finish your soup. If you have ever been in a situation where everything felt hopeless, where the walls were closing in and the odds were stacked so high against you that fighting seemed pointless, then you know the moment that changes everything. It is not always dramatic. Sometimes it is a phone call from a person you did not expect. Sometimes it is a door opening when every other door has slammed shut. For Amelia, that moment came on Tuesday morning when her phone rang with an unknown number from a Scranton area code. Amelia, honey, it is Margaret. Margaret Sterling's voice came through the phone with a quality Amelia had never heard before. Not the warm, grandmotherly tone she used at holiday dinners, not the tough, practical voice she deployed when something needed fixing. This was something else. This was fury, held under control so tight it vibrated. Margaret Sterling was 65 years old, and she was, in Amelia's opinion, the best person the Sterling family had ever produced. A former nurse who had worked double shifts for 20 years to raise Alexander alone after his father left when Alexander was 3. She still lived in the same modest house in Scranton, Pennsylvania, a 2-bedroom ranch with a chain-link fence, and a garden she tended with the same fierce discipline she applied to everything. She had refused every offer Alexander made to move her somewhere bigger or fancier. This is my home, she always said. I earned it. I am staying. She had welcomed Amelia into the family with open arms and the blunt warmth of a woman who did not waste time on pretense. She had told Amelia, at their first meeting, my son is smart and ambitious, and he can be very charming, but he can also be a horse's rear end. If he ever gives you trouble, you call me. Amelia had laughed at the time. She was not laughing now. I know about the woman, Margaret said. I have known since Easter. Amelia sat down on the edge of Dee's couch. Since Easter? He left his phone on the kitchen counter. When he went out to the car for more dinner rolls, I saw the messages. I did not see everything, but I saw enough. A woman's name, the kind of messages a married man has no business sending to anyone who is not his wife. Margaret, why did you not tell me? The older woman was quiet for a moment. When she spoke, her voice cracked for the first time. Because I was a coward. Because I was afraid of losing him. He is my only child, Amelia. The only thing I have in this world besides this house and my garden. I confronted him in the driveway on Easter Sunday while you were inside doing the dishes. And he told me to mind my own business. He said if I interfered, he would cut me off completely. No visits, no phone calls, no relationship with the grandchild. She paused. He threatened to take away my grandchild before that baby was even born. My own son, and I was so afraid of losing them both that I stayed quiet. I have hated myself every single day since. Amelia closed her eyes. She understood fear. She understood the calculus of silence, the way you weigh what you might lose against what you might gain, and sometimes the math says, stay quiet and keep your head down. She had done that math herself for 5 years. What changed? Amelia asked. Why are you calling me now, Aunt? Because I talked to my sister last week. My sister Eleanor, you have met her. She asked me how you were doing, how the baby was, and I lied to her. I told her everything was wonderful. And when I hung up the phone, I looked at myself in the mirror, and I did not recognize the woman looking back. I raised that boy in a 2-bedroom house on a nurse's salary. I taught him that a man's word is his bond. I taught him that how you treat people, especially the people who trust you, that is the measure of who you are. Her voice hardened. And he turned into this, a man who cheats on his pregnant wife and calls her names I will not repeat. A man who threatens his own mother to keep her silent. That is not the boy I raised. That boy is gone. I do not know when I lost him, but he is gone. Margaret. I am done being afraid, Amelia. I have already lost my son. The boy I knew does not exist anymore, but my grandbaby exists. And you exist. And I will not stand by and watch him destroy the only family I have left. Then Margaret said something that changed the trajectory of everything. There is something you need to know. Alexander has a safe deposit box at First National Bank here in Scranton. He has had it since he was 25, before the marriage, before Sterling Global went public, before any of this. He rented it back when he was just a kid with big ideas and no money. How do you know about it? Because I co-signed the original rental agreement. He was 25, and he did not have enough credit history to rent a box on his own. He needed someone with an established banking relationship, so I signed. He probably forgot about that years ago. He thinks I do not know the box still exists. She paused. But a mother always knows. On Wednesday, Amelia and Dee drove to Scranton. It was a 2-hour drive on a gray, overcast day, the kind of weather that made the highway feel endless. Amelia drove because Dee's car was making a noise that neither of them could identify, and neither of them trusted. They stopped once for gas and once for the bathroom because Spencer was using Amelia's bladder as a trampoline. Margaret met them at the First National Bank on Lackawanna Avenue at 10 in the morning. She was dressed in what Amelia recognized as her Sunday best. A navy blue dress and low heels, and a pearl necklace that she had told Amelia was the only nice piece of jewelry she had ever owned. She had dressed up for this, as if going to the bank to betray her son's secrets was a solemn occasion that demanded respect. In a way, it was. The bank manager was a cautious man named Henderson, who clearly did not want to be in the middle of whatever this was. He listened to Margaret's claim of co-signer status. He reviewed Amelia's marriage certificate and identification. He made 2 phone calls to the bank's legal department. He disappeared into an office for 30 minutes. They waited in a row of plastic chairs near the vault entrance. Margaret sat with her back straight and her hands folded in her lap. Dee chewed her thumbnail. Amelia felt Spencer doing somersaults. Finally, Henderson returned. I have confirmed that, Mrs. Margaret Sterling is listed as a co-signer on box number 417. And as the legal spouse of the primary renter, Mrs. Amelia Sterling also has access rights under New York banking law. He looked deeply uncomfortable. If you would follow me. The safe deposit box was a medium-sized steel container, unremarkable from the outside. Henderson placed it on the viewing table and left the room, closing the door behind him with obvious relief. Margaret looked at Amelia. Open it. Inside the box, neatly arranged with the precision of a man who trusted his own invincibility, were the following items. 2 backup hard drives, black, unmarked, each about the size of a deck of cards. A second passport in the name of David Allen Brooks, with Alexander's photograph. Property documents for an entity called Apex Holdings, LLC, registered in the British Virgin Islands, and a leather-bound notebook, the kind you would buy at a stationery store, filled cover to cover with Alexander's handwriting. Amelia picked up the notebook and opened it. The pages were filled with columns of numbers, dates, amounts, account numbers, entity names, transaction after transaction, meticulously recorded in Alexander's neat, angular handwriting. It was a ledger, a personal record of every financial transaction he had made through his network of shell companies. He had documented his own crimes, written them down by hand in a leather notebook kept in a safe deposit box in his hometown. The arrogance of it took her breath away. He was so certain that no one would ever look, so certain that his mother did not know about the box, so certain that his pregnant wife was too stupid to find it. Dee looked over her shoulder and whispered a word that was not appropriate for a bank. Frank Hobson's reaction, when they brought him the data that evening, was the closest thing to excitement Amelia had ever seen from the man. He practically vibrated as he reviewed the hard drives and the handwritten ledger, his coffee growing cold beside him, his cat deficit watching from her filing cabinet throne. "This is extraordinary," he said, flipping through the notebook. With the reverence of an archaeologist handling a Dead Sea Scroll, he documented everything, every transaction, every shell company, every wire transfer. "With this ledger and the data on these hard drives, I can map every dollar he moved. I can show exactly where the money came from, where it went, and how he tried to hide it." "So you can prove it now?" Amelia asked. Frank set down the notebook and looked at her. "I can build an incredibly compelling case, but compelling is not the same as prosecutable. A defense attorney, a good one, will argue that this notebook is personal, unverified, potentially fabricated. They will say the hard drives could have been tampered with. They will attack the chain of custody. Without corroboration from inside Sterling Global, without someone who can testify that these external records match the internal financial systems of the company, a jury might have reasonable doubt. So we still need someone inside. We need the CFO, Nathan Cross. He is the one who would have processed these transactions on the company side. His testimony, combined with internal documents, combined with this notebook and the hard drives, that is a case no defense attorney in the world can beat. That is a case the SEC and the Department of Justice will fall over themselves to prosecute. One more piece, one more person, one more risk. Amelia looked at Dee. "I know Nathan's wife, Rebecca Cross. We have been to the same company events for years. I need to reach Nathan, but I cannot go through official channels. Alexander would know instantly." Dee nodded. "Then you go through Rebecca, wife to wife, mother to mother." That was exactly what she did. Thursday morning, Amelia called Rebecca Cross. She kept it vague and personal, just enough to open the door without revealing what lay behind it. "Rebecca, it is Amelia Sterling. I need to talk to Nathan about something important, something about the company. I cannot explain over the phone, and I need it to stay between us. Can he meet me?" Rebecca, who was a perceptive woman, married to a man she knew had been troubled about his work for months, did not ask unnecessary questions. "I will have him call you," she said, and then quietly, "Are you okay?" "I will be," Amelia said. "I hope." Nathan Cross met Amelia at a diner in White Plains on Thursday afternoon. He had chosen the location, somewhere far enough from Manhattan, that the odds of running into anyone from Sterling Global were close to zero. He arrived in a wrinkled button-down shirt, no tie, looking like a man who had not slept well in a very long time. He was 45 years old, with the slightly worn appearance of a middle management executive who had spent 2 decades in the trenches of corporate finance. He was not a bold man. He was not a brave man. He was the kind of man who followed rules and colored inside the lines and coached his daughter's soccer team on Saturdays. Under ordinary circumstances, he would never have agreed to meet the CEO's wife at a diner to discuss things that could end his career. But these were not ordinary circumstances. They sat in a booth near the back. Amelia ordered tea she did not drink. Nathan ordered coffee. He stirred without tasting. They sat in silence for a moment, two people on the edge of something that could not be taken back. I am going to be direct with you, stated Nathan, because I do not have time to be anything else, Amelia said. I know that Alexander is embezzling from Sterling Global. I know about the shell companies. I know about the offshore accounts. I know about the villa in Portofino that was purchased with 25 million euros of stolen money. I have documentation, external documentation, bank statements, property records, and a handwritten ledger where Alexander recorded every transaction. Nathan's face went through 3 distinct phases in the span of about 5 seconds. Disbelief, as if she had just told him the sky was green. Then recognition, the look of a man who is hearing out loud something he has suspected in silence. Then something that surprised Amelia. Relief. The profound, full-body relief of a person who has been carrying a secret that is too heavy and is finally being told they can set it down. I have known something was wrong for over a year, he said, his voice low. Transactions that did not make sense. Consulting fees to companies I could not verify existed. Wire transfers to accounts I had no documentation for. The numbers did not add up. They never added up. Why did you not say anything? Nathan looked at his coffee. I raised it once, 14 months ago. I brought a list of discrepancies to Alexander in his office and asked for explanations. He shut the door. He looked at me with those eyes of his. You know the look. The one that makes you feel like you're about 2 inches tall. And he told me that there were aspects of the business that were above my pay grade. He said if I wanted to keep my position, I should focus on the numbers I was told to focus on and stop asking questions about numbers that were not my concern. He paused. I have a wife, 2 kids, a mortgage in Westchester that takes half my paycheck. I told myself I was being paranoid. I told myself the CEO of a billion-dollar company would not be stupid enough to steal from himself. I told myself a lot of things that let me sleep at night. But you knew. Yeah. He met her eyes. I knew, and I have hated myself for staying quiet. Every quarterly report I signed, I knew something was wrong, and I signed it anyway because I was afraid. Nathan, what I am about to ask you could cost you everything. Your job, your reputation, possibly worse. I cannot promise you it will be safe, but I can promise you that what Alexander is doing will come out eventually, with or without your help. And when it does, everyone who stayed silent will have to answer for that silence. The question is whether you want to be the man who helped stop it or the man who looked the other way. Nathan stared at his coffee for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was steady. My daughter is 9. Last week she came home from school and told me about a project where they had to write about someone they admired. She wrote about me. His eyes glistened. She wrote about me, Amelia. She said I was the most honest person she knew. And I sat there reading it and I thought, if she ever finds out what I have been ignoring at work, she will never look at me the same way again. He straightened in his seat. What do you need from me? Internal documents, wire transfer records, board authorizations, the real ledgers that show where the money went inside the company, everything that matches what I already have from outside. And then what? Then we take it to the federal government, the SEC and the Department of Justice. Once it is in their hands, Alexander cannot suppress it. I need protection, Nathan said. Legal protection. In writing. Before I hand over anything, I am not being brave for nothing. I have a family. you will have it. I have an attorney who specializes in exactly this kind of case. She will make sure you are protected under the Whistleblower Protection Act. Nathan nodded slowly. When? Saturday. This Saturday. Can you get the documents by then? I can have them tonight. I have been quietly making copies for months, just in case. I guess some part of me always knew this day was coming. They shook hands in the parking lot of the diner. Nathan drove north toward Westchester and his family. Amelia drove south toward the city and hers. For the first time in weeks, she felt something she had almost forgotten the texture of: hope. Friday afternoon. Everything was falling into place. Sandra Palmer had the divorce filing prepared, ready to submit the moment the federal case went public. Frank Hobson had assembled a preliminary forensic report that was devastating in its detail. Nathan Cross had agreed to testify and was gathering internal documents. The case was building towards something that felt, for the first time, unstoppable. Alexander came home from work that evening in what Amelia recognized as his performance mode. Extra attentive, extra charming. He cooked dinner, badly, his signature pasta with too much garlic, and he talked about baby names and nursery furniture as if they were a normal couple having a normal evening. He rubbed her feet while they watched television. He told her she was beautiful. Amelia played along. She had become very good at playing along. Two actors on a stage, performing a marriage for an audience of 0. Then, over the pasta, Alexander said something that turned her blood to ice. Oh, I almost forgot. Big news at the office today. I hired a new chief legal officer, David Blackwell. He starts Monday. Amelia kept her fork moving, kept her face neutral. David Blackwell? I do not think I know the name. He is the best corporate defense attorney on the Eastern Seaboard. Harvard Law, 20 years of experience. With the company expanding into European markets, I figured we need someone world-class protecting our interests. That sounds smart, Amelia said, and took a bite of pasta. The moment she was alone in the bathroom, she locked the door, sat on the edge of the tub, and texted D. He hired David Blackwell. Google him. Now. Dee's response came in 4 minutes. It was a text message that read like a verdict. David Blackwell. Former federal prosecutor turned corporate defense attorney. Specializes in making corporate fraud cases disappear. His clients include 3 Fortune 500 CEOs who were investigated by the SEC and walked free. His firm charges $4,000 an hour. He is the person you hire when you know the feds are coming and you want to make sure they find nothing. Then a second text. He did not hire this guy for European expansion. He hired him because he knows someone is looking at the books. Amelia sat on the edge of that bathtub and felt the hope she had carefully built over the past week start to crack. If Blackwell got inside Sterling Global on Monday, the first thing he would do was a comprehensive internal audit, not to find problems, but to erase them. He would identify every digital trail Alexander had left. He would scrub records, rewrite transaction histories, and build a legal fortress so thick that Frank Hobson's forensic report would bounce off it like a rubber ball. And he would identify Nathan Cross as a vulnerability and neutralize him. A quiet conversation, a generous severance package tied to a non-disclosure agreement, or, if Nathan had already taken documents, a criminal referral for theft of proprietary company information. They had until Monday. 72 hours, and the clock was already ticking. The next 72 hours were the worst of Amelia's life, worse than finding the text messages, worse than the parking lot behind the Kroger. Because what happened next was not a single blow. It was a series of blows, each one landing before she had recovered from the last, each one stripping away another layer of protection until she was standing alone with nothing but her anger and her $80,000 and a baby kicking furiously inside her. Friday night, 11 o'clock. Alexander was supposed to be asleep. Amelia had waited until his breathing was slow and steady before slipping out of bed and padding barefoot down the hallway to his study. There was one more file she needed, a folder of account numbers she had seen during her first sweep but had not photographed because she had run out of time. She eased the study door open. She turned on the desk lamp. She opened the filing cabinet and found the folder. She was photographing the third page with her cheap CVS camera. The click of the shutter, absurdly loud in the silent apartment, when the door opened behind her. Alexander was standing there in his bathrobe. His hair was mussed. His feet were bare. His eyes were wide awake. For a moment, neither of them moved. His gaze traveled from her face to the open filing cabinet to the camera in her hand. The silence was the loudest sound Amelia had ever heard. "What are you doing?" His voice was quiet, not angry. That was worse. Anger she could have handled. This was something else, calculation, assessment. A predator deciding whether the movement in the brush was prey or threat. "I could not sleep," Amelia said. Her voice sounded remarkably steady for a woman whose heart was trying to exit her body through her throat. "I was looking for Spencer's insurance enrollment forms. Dr. Mitchell needs them for the specialist referral." "You are photographing insurance forms." "The printer is not working. I was going to take the images to an office store tomorrow to make copies." The lie sat between them like a dead animal. Alexander looked at the camera. He looked at the filing cabinet. He looked at her. Then he crossed the room and gently, almost tenderly, took the camera from her hand. His fingers brushed hers. The touch made her skin crawl. "Go to bed, sweetheart. You need your rest. I will find the forms for you." She went. She lay in bed, heart hammering, and she listened to him move around the study for the next 45 minutes. When he finally came to bed, he fell asleep within minutes, breathing the peaceful sleep of a man who believed he was in control. At 2 a.m, Amelia texted D. "He caught me in the office." He took the camera. "He knows?" Dee's reply was immediate. She clearly had not been sleeping either. "The camera only had copies of what you already have backed up. Nothing is lost. But he is going to escalate now. Be ready." She was right. Alexander spent the weekend being terrifyingly normal. Saturday brunch at their usual restaurant. A walk through Central Park on Sunday, his arm around her shoulders, pointing out dogs and strollers, as if they were any other expecting couple enjoying a fall afternoon. Sunday morning church, where Pastor Walker smiled his warm smile, and shook their hands, and Amelia felt a rage so pure it was almost holy. Alexander watched her throughout. She could feel his eyes on her when she turned away, assessing, calculating. He was trying to determine how much she knew, whether the camera incident was innocent or intentional, whether his pregnant wife was a snoop or a threat. She gave him nothing. She smiled. She ate. She complimented his terrible cooking. She was the best actress in New York. Monday morning, catastrophe arrived with the efficiency of a professional. Alexander left for the office at 7, sharp. David Blackwell's first day. At 8:30, Amelia walked to a pharmacy 2 blocks from the penthouse to pick up her prenatal vitamins. She handed the pharmacist her credit card. Declined. She tried again. Declined. She called the credit card company from the sidewalk outside the pharmacy. Her prenatal vitamins, sitting on the counter inside, unpurchased. "I am sorry, Mrs. Sterling. Your account has been temporarily suspended at the request of the primary account holder." She called the bank next. Her access to the joint checking account had been frozen, pending a security review. A security review that nobody had told her about. At 9:15, her phone rang. Sandra Palmer's assistant. speaking in the careful tones of someone delivering bad news they wished they did not have to deliver. "Mrs. Sterling, I am very sorry. Our firm has been contacted by Sterling Global's legal counsel. They have raised a potential conflict of interest regarding our representation of you. Ms. Palmer has made the difficult decision that we can no longer continue as your attorney in this matter." 3 strikes in 90 minutes. Credit card killed, bank account frozen, lawyer gone, all before 9:30 on a Monday morning. Which meant Alexander had planned this over the weekend. During those lovely walks and those terrible pasta dinners and those reassuring forehead kisses, he had been plotting her financial annihilation while rubbing her feet. She stood on a Manhattan sidewalk, 7 months pregnant, with $80,000 in a savings account and no other assets in the world. No credit card, no checking account, no lawyer. The $80,000 was all that stood between her and complete dependence on the man who was trying to destroy her. Monday and Tuesday passed in a state of suspended dread. Alexander came home each evening and played the devoted husband. He asked about her day, he asked about the baby, he cooked dinner. He was perfectly, terrifyingly pleasant. He did not mention the credit card, the bank account, or the lawyer. He did not need to. The message had been delivered. On Wednesday evening, he delivered the final blow. After dinner, he asked her to sit in the living room. His voice was gentle, warm, concerned. The voice of a man who loves his wife and wants only the best for her. "Amelia, we need to talk about something, and I need you to hear me out before you respond." She sat. She folded her hands over her belly. Spencer was unusually still, as if he too were holding his breath. "I know what you have been doing," Alexander said. He did not raise his voice. He did not slam his hand on a table. He spoke with the calm, measured authority of a man delivering a quarterly earnings report. "I know about the forensic accountant. Frank Hobson, semi-retired IRS, works out of Hoboken. I know about the safe deposit box in Scranton. I know my mother helped you access it. I know about the documents you photographed in my office. I know about the handwritten records." Each word landed like a hammer blow. He knew everything. Not how much she had, not every detail, but enough. The broad strokes, the architecture of her resistance. "My mother," he said, and for one fleeting second, something that might have been genuine pain crossed his face. "I did not think she would go that far." Then the pain was gone, replaced by the smooth, impenetrable surface of Alexander Sterling, negotiator. "I understand why you did this, Amelia. I do. I hurt you. The thing with Katerina, it was a mistake, a terrible mistake, and it is over. I ended it last week. I am committed to this family, to you, to Spencer." He leaned forward in his chair. "But if you try to take this public, the affair, the financial allegations, whatever your retired accountant thinks he has found, you need to understand what happens next. I will be forced to protect myself. And Amelia, I am very, very good at protecting myself." He laid it out with the precision of a lawyer reading a contract. Pastor Walker was prepared to testify about Amelia's emotional instability, her anxiety, her paranoid behavior during pregnancy. Her medical records showed elevated blood pressure and stress. David Blackwell had already conducted a preliminary review of Sterling Global's finances and found nothing irregular. Alexander had the resources to fight a custody battle for 5 years, 10 years, however long it took. "You are a former school teacher from Ohio," he said, his voice gentle, almost kind, which made it somehow worse than if he had been shouting. "I am Alexander Sterling. I have 100 lawyers, a billion-dollar company, and every resource in the world. Who do you think wins that fight?" Then he made his offer. $3 million, the apartment transferred to her name, shared custody with favorable visitation terms, in exchange for her complete silence about the affair, about the finances, about everything. Take the deal, Amelia. It is more than generous. Or fight me and spend the next 5 years watching your savings disappear while I make sure every judge and journalist in this country sees a stressed, hormonal woman who tried to destroy her husband because she was jealous and pregnant and not thinking clearly. He stood up. He placed his hand on her shoulder. The weight of it felt like a shackle. Think about it, for Spencer's sake. He walked to the bedroom and closed the door. Amelia sat in the dark living room for a very long time. The city lights glittered beyond the windows. The white roses in their vases were beginning to wilt. Spencer kicked once, hard, and then was still. She thought about the deal. $3 million, a penthouse, shared custody. It was, by any ordinary measure, a fortune. Most people would take that deal without a second thought. Most people would call it winning. But Amelia kept hearing those 3 words, the pregnant cow. She is too stupid to notice. And she kept thinking about the $47 million he had stolen from his own company. Money that belonged to shareholders and employees and pensioners who had built their lives around the promise that Sterling Global was run by an honest man. She thought about the thousands of people who worked at Sterling Global, people with mortgages and children and dreams, people who had no idea their CEO was looting the company from the inside. $3 million to look the other way. That was the deal. Not just for her silence about the affair, but for her silence about a crime. Take the money and let a thief keep stealing. She was not going to take that deal. But she could not see a way forward either. Not tonight. Tonight she was tired and pregnant and alone in a dark apartment that smelled like dying roses. Tonight she needed her friend. She drove to Queens. Dee opened the door before Amelia knocked. She had been waiting. She took one look at Amelia's face and stepped aside without a word. They sat on the second-hand couch. Dee's daughter, Lily, was asleep in the next room, her light snoring just barely audible through the thin apartment walls. The television was off. The only light came from the kitchen, where a single bulb cast a warm yellow glow over the dishes in the sink. "He knows everything," Amelia said. "Not the details, but the broad strokes. Frank. The safe deposit box? His mother. He gave me an ultimatum. $3 million and the apartment in exchange for my silence about everything, the affair and the embezzlement. And if you do not take it, he paints me as an unstable, paranoid pregnant woman. He has the pastor, he has my medical records, he has Blackwell cleaning up the company's books as we speak. He has 100 lawyers and $1 billion and the confidence of a man who has never lost at anything in his entire life." Dee was quiet. She did not offer an immediate counter. She let the silence breathe. "Maybe I should take the deal," Amelia said. The words tasted like ash. $3 million is enough to start over. I go back to Ohio. I buy a house. I raise Spencer. I never think about Alexander Sterling again." She paused. "I am not a lawyer, Dee. I am not a CEO or a federal agent or a forensic accountant. I am an art teacher. I teach 17-year-olds about Impressionism and color theory. What was I thinking, going up against a billionaire? What kind of delusional pregnant woman picks a fight she cannot possibly win?" Dee listened to every word. She did not interrupt. She did not contradict. When Amelia was finished, Dee stood up and walked to Lily's bedroom door. She opened it a crack and looked at her sleeping daughter for a long moment. Then she came back and sat down. "When Marcus left me," she said, "I had $12 in my checking account and a baby with an ear infection. My apartment lease was up in 2 weeks, and I could not make rent. My mother told me to go back to Marcus because at least he paid the bills. My sister said the same thing. My friends said the same thing. Everyone and I mean everyone, told me to just let it go. Do not make trouble. Take what you can get and be grateful. She looked at Amelia. You know what I did? I slept on my sister's couch for 6 months, Lily and me, in a living room that smelled like cats. I worked days at a temp agency, answering phones, and went to paralegal school at night. I studied for exams at 2 in the morning with a baby on my chest who would not stop screaming because her ears hurt and I could not afford the antibiotics. I filed for child support myself because I could not afford a lawyer. I stood in front of a judge in a suit from Goodwill that did not fit right and shoes that pinched my feet, and I made my case. I was shaking so bad I could barely read my own notes, and I won, not because I was rich or connected or had a team of brilliant experts, because I was right, and because I was too angry to quit. She took Amelia's hands. You are not fighting Alexander Sterling because you are powerful. You are fighting him because he is a thief and a liar and a fraud, and that baby inside you deserves a mother who did not look the other way when she had the chance to do the right thing. You have the evidence. You have Frank's report. You have the ledger and the hard drives. So what if you lost a fancy lawyer? We will find another one, a hungry one, the kind who takes cases like this because they have been dreaming about it their whole career. She squeezed harder. And you have me, and you have Margaret, and you have $80,000 your mama told you to save. And that is more than enough, because we are angry, and we are right. And angry women who are right have been toppling empires since the beginning of time, Amelia cried. Not the quiet, controlled tears she had been rationing for weeks. The real kind. The ugly kind, where your face contorts and your body shakes and sounds come out of you that do not sound human. She cried until Dee's college sweatshirt was soaked, and her eyes were swollen, and Spencer was kicking so hard it was like he was trying to applaud. When she was done, she wiped her face, took a breath that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than her lungs, and said, "Okay, find me the hungry lawyer." Dee found Rosa Gutierrez within 24 hours. Rosa was 48 years old, and she walked into Dee's kitchen like she owned it. She had spent 12 years at the Securities and Exchange Commission prosecuting corporate fraud before leaving to start her own practice. She was razor sharp, unflinching, and had the rare quality of being simultaneously intimidating and trustworthy. She sat at Dee's kitchen table on Friday morning, reviewed Frank's forensic report, examined the photographs of the safe deposit box contents, and looked at Amelia with an expression that can only be described as professional hunger. "You have a strong case," she said. "The handwritten ledger alone is extraordinary. He essentially confessed on paper. Combined with the CFO's testimony and the forensic analysis, the SEC and the DOJ will move on this." "What about David Blackwell?" Amelia asked. "He has been inside the company for a week. He could be scrubbing records right now, Zeta. Blackwell can sanitize the company's internal systems, but he cannot touch what is in your possession. The safe deposit box contents were obtained through legitimate legal access. Your co-signer rights and spousal rights are documented. Nathan Cross's testimony, once we file, is protected under the Federal Whistleblower Protection Act. Here is what we do." Rosa laid out the plan with the clean efficiency of someone who had done this before. "We go straight to the federal government. I file, simultaneously with the SEC and the Department of Justice, an emergency complaint accompanied by Frank's forensic report, the safe deposit box evidence, and Nathan Cross's sworn testimony with supporting internal documents. We also file for an emergency asset freeze to prevent Alexander from moving or hiding any more money. Once this is in the hands of the federal government, Alexander Sterling and David Blackwell and 1,000 lawyers cannot make it disappear. I am taking this case pro bono, Rosa added. I left the SEC because I got tired of watching billionaires buy their way out of accountability. Taking down a CEO who steals from his own company and calls his pregnant wife stupid, that is not just a case. That is the reason I went to law school. There was one crucial requirement. Nathan Cross had to deliver his internal documents and sworn testimony before the filing. Without him, the case was strong but not airtight. With him, it was bulletproof. Saturday. Nathan met Rosa at her office in Lower Manhattan. He was pale and his hands shook as he laid stack after stack of documents on her conference table. Internal wire transfer records, board authorization documents bearing Alexander's signature, emails from Alexander's corporate account directing transfers to entities that match the shell companies in the handwritten ledger. Everything Frank needed to connect the external evidence to the internal reality of Sterling Global. Rosa reviewed the material. Frank, who had driven in from Hoboken with coffee stains on his shirt and fire in his eyes, cross-referenced it against his forensic report. The numbers aligned perfectly. Every breadcrumb he had followed from the outside matched a transaction recorded on the inside. $47.3 million, Frank said quietly. Over 3 years, siphoned through 7 shell companies into accounts controlled by Alexander Sterling and Katerina Voss, funded the purchase of a €25 million villa in Portofino, funded jewelry, travel, private accounts, all of it stolen from Sterling Global. Nathan signed his sworn testimony. Rosa notarized it. The filing was prepared and scheduled for Monday morning at 10, Sunday night. Amelia sat in Dee's living room, and for the first time in 3 weeks, she felt something she recognized as hope. It is done, she told Dee. Rosa files tomorrow morning. The SEC opens an investigation. The DOJ issues subpoenas. By tomorrow afternoon, his world falls apart. Dee hugged her, held her tight. You did it. You actually did it. Monday morning, 8:47. Rosa called. Her voice was controlled, but underneath the control was a blade. We have a problem. Nathan Cross just called me. Alexander found out. Blackwell's internal audit flagged the documents Nathan accessed last week. Alexander confronted Nathan at 7:30 this morning and fired him on the spot. Amelia's hands went cold. But the whistleblower protections. They activate once we file. We have not filed yet. It was scheduled for 10, but that is not the worst part. Nathan says Alexander is moving money. Right now, he is initiating emergency wire transfers out of Sterling Global's operating accounts to overseas entities. And his assistant booked a private jet to Geneva for tonight. One way. The settlement offer, the $3 million, the gentle voice, and the hand on her shoulder. It had all been a performance, a stall. He had never intended to let her win. He had been buying time to drain the company and disappear. If he got on that jet, he was gone. Swiss banking privacy, Liechtenstein accounts. A trail so cold, it would take years to follow, if anyone could follow it at all. He would vanish into the vast, impenetrable world of offshore wealth, and Amelia and Spencer and the thousands of people who depended on Sterling Global would be left with nothing. How much time do we have? Amelia asked. International wire transfers of this size take 24 to 48 hours to clear. If we file now and get an emergency freeze, we can stop the transfers. But we need to move right now. Today, this morning. Amelia did not hesitate. File it. File everything. Now. Rosa filed at 9:15. At 10:30, Dee made a call she had been saving for exactly this moment. She called Cassandra Martinez at the Wall Street Journal. Dee did not give her the full story. She gave her just enough, an anonymous tip with enough verifiable detail to run a breaking news alert. Sterling Global CEO under federal investigation for embezzlement. Sources indicate tens of millions in company funds diverted to offshore accounts. SEC and DOJ complaints filed this morning. The story hit the internet at 11:15. By noon, Sterling Global's stock was in freefall. Automatic circuit breakers triggered a trading halt. The correspondent banks processing Alexander's emergency wire transfers, having now seen the news, froze the transactions pending compliance review. By 1 o'clock, Alexander Sterling's empire was disintegrating in real time. His phone was ringing with calls from panicked board members, terrified investors, circling journalists. David Blackwell was in his office, trying to contain a wildfire that was already out of control. At 1:30, Alexander told his assistant to have the car brought around. He was going to Teterboro. The jet was fueled. Geneva, then Liechtenstein, then anywhere. At 2:30, Rose's emergency court order came through. Federal marshals were dispatched to Teterboro. FBI agents headed to Sterling Global Tower. At 2:52, Alexander Sterling arrived at the private terminal at Teterboro Airport. His Gulfstream G650 was gleaming on the tarmac, engines warming, stairs down, ready to carry him to a life without consequences. He never reached the stairs. Federal marshals intercepted him on the tarmac. They served him with the restraining order. They confiscated his passport, both of them, the real one and the one in the name of David Allen Brooks. They placed him in the back of an unmarked vehicle. The last thing he saw, before they drove him away, was his jet, still idling on the runway, going nowhere. A $65 million machine, beautiful and useless, waiting for a passenger who would never board. At 3:15, Amelia was at Margaret's house in Scranton. She had driven there that morning with Dee because Margaret had insisted and because it felt right. Whatever happened, she wanted to be in the house where good values had once lived, even if the boy who had been taught them had forgotten everyone. She was sitting in Margaret's living room, drinking tea that was too sweet, when the news broke on the television. The screen showed an image that would become famous. Alexander Sterling, in his $5,000 suit, standing on the tarmac at Teterboro, surrounded by federal agents, his private jet visible behind him like a tombstone for the life he was about to lose. Margaret stared at the screen. Her face was stone. Then a single tear ran down her right cheek. "I am sorry," she whispered, not to Amelia, not to the television, to the boy who used to sit at her kitchen table doing his homework, the boy who used to bring her dandelions from the yard, the boy who had grown up to become a man she did not recognize. Amelia took her hand. They sat together in silence, two women who had loved the same man and lost him in different ways. Dee came in from the kitchen, carrying a plate of sandwiches that nobody had asked for. "You need to eat," she said. "Both of you. Spencer's orders." At 5:45 that evening, Alexander Sterling was sitting in a processing room at the FBI field office in Lower Manhattan. He had been allowed one phone call. He called Amelia. She was still at Margaret's. The house was quiet. Dee was washing dishes in the kitchen. Margaret was in the garden, pulling weeds in the failing light, because that was what she did when the world was unbearable. She put her hands in the dirt. Amelia looked at the phone. She saw the number. She knew where he was calling from. Dee paused at the kitchen doorway, dish towel in hand, and said nothing. Margaret came in from the garden with dirt on her knees and stopped in the living room doorway. Amelia answered. For a moment there was nothing, just breathing, his and hers. "Amelia." His voice was stripped, raw, every layer of polish and charm and authority scraped away, leaving only the voice of a man who had run out of masks. I know what you did. I know it was you. All of it. Yes. Why? It was not a question exactly. More like the last sound a structure makes before it collapses. Why did you not just take the deal? 3 million. The apartment. You could have walked away. Amelia was quiet for a beat. Spencer kicked. She placed her hand on her belly, and she spoke. Because you called me a pregnant cow too stupid to notice. Because you stole from your own company, from the people who work for you, who trusted you, who built their lives around the promise that Sterling Global meant something. Because you were building a house in Italy for another woman with money that should have been your son's future. I did not take the deal, because the deal was a lie, Alexander. Just like everything else, and I am done accepting lies. Silence. She could hear him breathing. She could hear, or maybe she imagined, the sound of something breaking inside him. I am sorry, Amelia. His voice cracked. I am so sorry. I know you are, but sorry does not undo any of this. She hung up. She placed the phone face down on the coffee table. She looked at the plate of sandwiches Dee had made. She picked one up and took a bite. Turkey and Swiss on wheat bread with too much mustard. It was the best thing she had ever tasted. Margaret sat beside her. Dee sat on the other side. Nobody spoke. Spencer kicked. The three of them sat in a modest living room in Scranton, Pennsylvania, eating sandwiches, and outside the window the sun was going down and the streetlights were coming on, and somewhere in the distance a dog was barking, and life, ordinary and imperfect and beautiful, was going on. 3 weeks later, on a Sunday morning, in early October, Amelia went into labor. Not in a luxury Manhattan hospital, not in a private suite, with a personal chef and a concierge. At Scranton Regional Medical Center, the same hospital where Margaret Sterling had given birth to Alexander 38 years before. A community hospital with fluorescent lights and linoleum floors and nurses who called everyone honey. Dee was in the delivery room. She held Amelia's hand so tight they both lost circulation. She coached her through contractions with a mix of encouragement and profanity that made even the experienced labor nurse raise an eyebrow. Margaret was in the waiting room, reorganizing the magazine rack, because sitting still was not in her nature. She had brought a blanket she had knitted herself, blue and white, with Spencer's initials in the corner. She had been working on it since July, every stitch a prayer. Spencer James Brooks was born at 4:17 in the afternoon, weighing 7 pounds and 6 ounces. His heart was perfect. The irregularity from the ultrasound had resolved on its own in the 3rd trimester, exactly as Dr. Mitchell had said it might. He had his mother's eyes. Amelia held him against her chest, this tiny warm weight, this impossible, perfect, real thing, this reason. You are going to be so much better, she whispered into his downy hair. I promise. Margaret came in and saw her grandson for the first time and did something Amelia had never seen her do. She cried without trying to hide it. This tough, no-nonsense woman who had worked double shifts and raised a son alone and weathered every storm life had thrown at her stood in a hospital room with tears streaming down her face, completely undone by 10 tiny fingers. Dee took a photo. Amelia in the hospital bed, exhausted and radiant. Margaret beside her, holding Spencer's hand, with one finger, Spencer between them. Sleeping the profound sleep of someone who has just arrived in the world and is not yet sure what to make of it. 3 generations. 3 women and 1 very small boy. Connected not by blood alone, but by choice. By the decision to stand together when standing alone was no longer an option. Dee sent the photo to Frank Hobson, who replied, "Tell that kid his first case was a $1 billion takedown. He is already a legend. 1 year later, Alexander Sterling was convicted on 14 counts of wire fraud, securities fraud, and embezzlement. The trial lasted 6 weeks and was covered by every major news outlet in the country. The evidence was overwhelming. Frank Hobson's forensic report, Nathan Cross's testimony, the handwritten ledger from the safe deposit box in Scranton. Alexander's defense team, led by David Blackwell, fought hard. They attacked the chain of custody. They questioned the motives of every witness. They painted Amelia as a vindictive wife. None of it mattered. The evidence was too strong, the crimes too clear, the paper trail too meticulously documented by the criminal himself. Alexander Sterling was sentenced to 18 years in a federal correctional facility in Allentown, Pennsylvania. He was ordered to pay $52 million in restitution. Every personal asset was seized and liquidated. The unfinished villa in Portofino was sold at auction to a German industrialist. The Gulfstream G650 was sold to a Saudi prince. The Park Avenue penthouse was sold to a tech billionaire from San Francisco. Katerina Voss was arrested in Dubai 6 months after the trial and extradited to the United States. She was convicted of conspiracy and money laundering and sentenced to 5 years. During her testimony, she revealed something that stunned even Amelia. Alexander had run a similar scheme at a company he had worked for before founding Sterling Global. He had done this before. Amelia was never the first woman he deceived. Katerina, it turned out, was never the last woman he lied to either. Pastor James Walker resigned from Grace Fellowship the week after Alexander's arrest became public. The $2 million donation was returned to Sterling Global's restitution fund by court order. Walker moved to a small town in North Carolina. He never contacted Amelia again. He never apologized. Nathan Cross was fully protected under the Federal Whistleblower Protection Act. He received a financial settlement and reinvented himself as a corporate compliance consultant, helping companies identify and prevent the exact kind of fraud he had been too afraid to report for too long. He sends Amelia a Christmas card every year. Last year's had a photo of his daughter, now 10, holding a trophy from her school's ethics essay contest. Sterling Global survived. Barely. The stock lost 60% of its value in the first week after the scandal broke, and there were weeks when bankruptcy seemed inevitable. But the board of directors, led by new leadership, implemented sweeping reforms. Transparent accounting, independent oversight, a corporate culture built on accountability rather than worship of a single personality. 18 months later, the stock had recovered 70%. The company was smaller, humbler, and genuinely better. Rosa Gutierrez was featured in a Time magazine profile titled "The Woman Who Takes Down Billionaires." Her practice tripled in size. She and Amelia became real friends, the kind forged in crisis and sustained by mutual respect. They meet for dinner once a month when Amelia is in New York. Dee was promoted to senior paralegal at her firm. She used her bonus to take Lily to Disney World, where they rode Space Mountain 4 times and ate so much cotton candy they were both sick on the drive home. She still brings a bottle of grocery store wine to Amelia's house every Friday night. Some traditions are sacred. Margaret Sterling visits Amelia and Spencer every Sunday for dinner. She drives the 2 hours from Scranton, and she never complains about the distance. She has not visited her son in prison, not once. She writes him letters sometimes, late at night, sitting at her kitchen table with a cup of tea. She writes about Spencer, about his first steps, his first word, which was up, his obsession with the neighbor's cat. She writes about the weather and the garden and the new curtains she bought for the living room. She never sends the letters. They sit in a drawer beside her bed, unsent and unsendable, the private grief of a mother who loves her son and cannot forgive him. On her refrigerator, held up by a magnet shaped like the state of Pennsylvania, is the photo from the hospital. Amelia, Margaret, Spencer, she tells everyone at her new church that it is her family, because it is. Amelia Brooks moved back to Columbus, Ohio, in January. She used her divorce settlement, $12 million from Alexander's legitimate pre-marriage assets, assets that existed before the embezzlement and were therefore not part of the restitution order, to do three things. She set up a trust fund for Spencer's education and future. She established the Claire Brooks Foundation, named after her late mother, providing emergency financial assistance and legal resources to women escaping abusive or deceptive marriages. The Foundation's motto, printed on every piece of stationery and every page of its website, was the words her mother had spoken to her years ago in a kitchen in Ohio. A woman should always have her own money, and she bought a 3-bedroom house with a big backyard on a quiet street in the neighborhood where she grew up. She converted the detached garage into an art studio with good light and a space heater that rattled when the wind blew. She went back to teaching, part-time, at a community college. Introduction to Art History. Her students, mostly freshmen and adults returning to school, have no idea that their soft-spoken professor, with paint under her fingernails, once took down a billionaire CEO from the inside. On a Saturday morning in October, 1 year after the arrest, Amelia was in her garage studio, painting. Spencer was 13 months old, and he was everywhere, toddling between canvases with the determined unsteadiness of someone who has recently discovered legs. There was paint on his overalls, there was paint on her overalls, there was paint on the dog, a rescue mutt named Walnut, who had wandered into their yard in April and simply stayed. The canvas in front of her was large, abstract. Deep navy blues and metallic golds, layered and textured, a storm in the process of breaking apart to reveal something bright and clean behind it. She had been working on it for weeks, adding layers, scraping them away, adding more. It was not finished. She was not sure it ever would be. That was okay. Some things are not meant to be finished. They are meant to be lived in. The mailbox flag was up. She walked outside, Spencer on her hip, Walnut at her heels. In the mailbox, between a utility bill and a grocery store flyer, was a letter. The return address was the Federal Correctional Institution in Allentown, Pennsylvania. The handwriting was Alexander's. She stood in the yard for a moment, holding the envelope. Spencer reached for it with fat, paint-stained fingers. She held it out of his reach and carried him inside. She sat at the kitchen table. She opened it. I have lost everything, and I deserve all of it. The money, the company, the freedom, the reputation, all of it was built on lies, and lies have an expiration date. I know that now, but the thing that keeps me up at night is not the money. It is not the cell, or the jumpsuit, or the fact that the guards here call me by a number instead of a name. The thing I cannot stop thinking about is 3 words: pregnant cow, stupid. I said that about the most intelligent, most courageous person I have ever known. I said it casually, laughing, to a woman I was using to escape a life I was too small to deserve. And the woman I was mocking, the woman I dismissed as decoration, as a bird in a gilded cage, she saw through me when no one else could. She outmaneuvered me when I had every advantage. She protected our son when I was the one he needed protection from. I do not ask for your forgiveness. I have not earned it, and I may never earn it. I just need you to know that I finally see you, Amelia. I see who you really are. Not the wife I tried to make you into, not the woman I wanted you to be, the woman you always were, The woman I was too blind and too arrogant and too broken to recognize. I am sorry it took losing everything for me to open my eyes. I hope Spencer has your eyes. I hope he has your courage. I hope he never ever becomes anything like me. Amelia read the letter. She read it twice. Then she folded it carefully and placed it in the pocket of her paint-stained overalls. She did not cry. She did not smile. She did not feel triumph or vindication or even sadness exactly. She felt something quieter than all of those things. Something that had taken a year of therapy and a village of women who loved her, and one spectacular act of courage, and a baby with perfect rhythm in his tiny, strong heart to build. She felt free. She carried Spencer back to the garage. She set him down on the floor, where he immediately crawled toward a tube of blue paint with the focus of a heat-seeking missile. Walnut settled into his bed in the corner. The space heater rattled. The autumn light came through the window in long gold bars. Amelia picked up her brush. She looked at the canvas, the storm, the breaking, the light behind it. She dipped the brush in gold. She painted. Alexander Sterling built his empire on charm, ambition, and other people's trust. He believed he was untouchable. He believed his wife was a decoration, a pretty bird in a gilded cage, too foolish to see the bars and too timid to test them. He was wrong. Amelia Brooks did not have $1 billion. She did not have an army of lawyers or a father on the board of directors or a team of former spies at her disposal. She had a best friend who showed up at midnight with gas station coffee. She had a mother-in-law who chose her conscience over her own son. She had a retired accountant with a cat named Deficit who could follow a money trail through 7 countries. She had a lawyer who took the case because it was the right thing to do. She had $80,000 her mama told her to save. And she had courage, the quiet kind, the kind that does not announce itself with fanfare or fury, the kind that shows up in a parking lot behind a Kroger grocery store and decides, even when every voice in the world is saying, give up, to keep going. She did not just get mad. She did not just get even. She got free. And that gilded cage, the one he was so proud of, the one he thought would hold her forever, she turned it into evidence. This content was carefully researched, developed, and manually edited by our team to deliver meaningful stories with valuable life lessons. Every narrative is crafted to entertain, inspire, and empower our audience. We believe that great stories can change lives, and we are committed to bringing you content that matters. Thank you for being part of our community.